In this video, we're going to discuss the king of all server roles, the Mailbox server role. This is the server role that is the most important because it holds the mailbox and public folder databases. The Mailbox database contains the mailboxes that you establish within the organization. So that's a literal database that will contain data definitions, indexes, checksums, flags, really all of the information that make up a database is included within the Mailbox database. So what's inside the Mailbox database? Well, it's the data that is private for each individual user that has a mailbox. So when you open up, let's say, Outlook for the first time, and you look at all of the folders that are there, inbox, sent items, deleted items, those folders are all part of your mailbox. Anything that you put in those folders is part of your mailbox. Well, that mailbox is actually part of a mailbox database. It's really all one big file called an EDB file. So when an email comes into your organization, as you can see here, it eventually gets put into the hands of the Mailbox server role. That server will check and see who that mail goes to and place it in the correct mailbox. But ultimately, the mailboxes are all organized within a database with an EDB file extension. In a moment, we're going to take a look at the Exchange server itself, and you'll note that there are different types of recipients that you can create within Exchange. You can create mailboxes, mail contacts, mail users. You can also create distribution groups and dynamic distribution groups. All of these are different recipient types. But of those types, the one that is the most prevalent is the mailbox recipient, which actually has different types as well. Mailbox types include user, room, equipment, and linked. Now, if we just consider a user mailbox for a moment, a user mailbox is a combination of an Active Directory user account and a mailbox that's created within the Exchange Mailbox database. These two work together. Now, it's true, you can have a user account that may not have a mailbox, but you cannot have a mailbox that functions without it being connected to an Active Directory account. Okay, so we can talk about this till we're blue in the face, but until we see this for real on an Exchange server, really see how all of this comes together, it may not make sense. So let's take a look at our New York Exchange server. First, let's go hunting for the database file itself. Then let's examine the connection between the Active Directory accounts and the mailboxes that they're connected to. Then let's create a new user mailbox and discuss the other types available. And finally, let's test and see that our mailbox is actually working through Outlook web app. Okay, so we have a lot to do. Let's get started. Okay, and here we are on the New York Exchange server. As you can see, we have the Mailbox folder open under the Organization Configuration node, and you can see again all of the different options that you can configure for that Mailbox server. You'll note over here that we can create a new Mailbox database, new public folder database, new database availability groups. We're going to talk about some of the storage architecture in a later video. But at this time, let's talk about the fact that we do have an Exchange Mailbox database that was automatically created for us when we installed the Mailbox server role. Now, we mentioned that the Mailbox database is actually an EDB folder. If we go down to our folders, you can see here that I already have it opened up to the proper path. Under Exchange server, we follow it along under Mailbox. If we just click there, here we see Mailbox database, and you can see here that we have an EDB file. It's already growing in size, and the EDB file will continue to grow. It will grow and grow and grow, and so you have to consider that wherever you place the Mailbox database, that it should be in a location other than your C drive. It should be in a location really that allows for growth, as well as takes into consideration performance and disaster recovery. So we're going to talk about this a little bit later on. But you can see that this is your file. Now you might wonder, well, what are all these other files? These are what's called transaction logs. Transaction logs are sort of a duplicate of what's in the database itself. Again, in the future, we're going to talk about high availability, which has to take into account storage architecture. So at that time, we're going to explain all of the different files that are in here, so that you'll understand a little bit better how Exchange is designed in order to keep the data that it has safe. Now, if we go back to our Exchange console here and we look at recipient configuration, and you can see that there are already a couple of user mailboxes that have been created. Now you might say, well, how do you know they're user mailboxes? You can see here that the icons themselves give them away. But if we just move over a little bit, you can see that the recipient type details tell us that they are user mailboxes. Now, we can create additional user mailboxes by clicking the New Mailbox link, and we'll do that in a moment. But you can see that we can also create new mail contacts, new mail users, new distribution groups, new dynamic distribution groups. So there are a lot of different recipient types here. And then, as we already mentioned, when we create a new mailbox, there are 4 additional types that we can create there. You can also see that we have a discovery mailbox type. There are sometimes system recipients. There are legacy Exchange mailboxes that can show up in here as well. So there are a lot of different recipient types that we should be aware of. But for now, just to get things started, we understand that there are user mailboxes here. What about new mail contacts? How are they different from mailboxes? Well, when you create a new mail contact, it will actually create a contact in Active Directory that's mail enabled, and that contact will contain information. A mail contact has an external email address, so you'll be able to send mail to that mail contact in Exchange, but what happens is the message that's sent to the mail contact is routed to the external email address. So then you might be asking, well, what's a new mail user? Isn't that the same as a user mailbox? Actually, a mail user is the same as a contact in the sense that mail that's sent to a mail user will also be rerouted to an external email address. The difference between a mail contact and a mail user is that the mail user actually has Active Directory logon credentials. So a mail user can actually log on to the network as opposed to a mail contact, which simply receives email to their external email address. So it all depends on how you want to set up individuals within your organization. Do you have outside salespersons that perhaps require mail be sent to an external email address, but at the same time require the ability to log on? In that case, they would be new mail users. Or do you have individuals that never come in, never need to log into the network, and so they just need their email sent to this external email address? In that case, you want to create a new mail contact. Now, as for distribution groups and dynamic distribution groups, these are similar in the sense that you create a group that you can email the group and it gets sent out to anyone who's in the group. But a distribution group in and of itself is a static arrangement where you put all of the members within that group that then receive that mail. A dynamic distribution group has parameters that are set. And so if individuals fall within the parameters, when an email is sent, then that email will go to them. If they fall outside of those parameters at any given time, the dynamic distribution group will automatically update itself so that mail will not be sent to that individual. But now going back to the connection that's made between Active Directory and our user mailboxes, for every single one of these mailboxes, we should be able to go to Active Directory and see that a user account exists. So if we click the Start button and we open up Active Directory Users and Computers, and we can see right away that there is John Smith here and Susan Baker here. So what happens if we select John Smith and delete the account? Okay, so the Active Directory account no longer exists. What happens to the mailbox? If we go back to our Exchange Management Console, and if we refresh the console, and now you can see that the mailbox is gone. Now you might say, well, where did it go? Well, when we deleted the user account, the mailbox was removed along with it. There are certainly ways to bring back the user account as well as the mailbox. In fact, one of the new features to Server 2008 R2 is the ability that we have to have an Active Directory recycle bin. So if you had a Server 2008 R2 system running, and if the functionality level was set to Server 2008 R2, and if you had the Active Directory recycle bin enabled, well, then you can restore the user account and the mailbox would be restored along with it. So it's important to keep in mind that there is that relationship between the Active Directory side and the Exchange side to these mailboxes. Keeping that in mind, let's create a new mailbox. And at the same time, we're going to create a new Active Directory user account. So to accomplish this, we start by clicking New Mailbox. And you can see that the new mailbox wizard begins. So to start with, we have to choose a mailbox type. You can see here that there are 4 types to choose from. We can choose user mailbox, which is the one we're going to choose. User mailboxes are connected to Active Directory user accounts. So if you work for a company and you log into the domain and you open up your Outlook and it connects to your mailbox, well, that mailbox type is a user mailbox. That mailbox is located directly on the Exchange server, so it's not the same as a mail contact or a mail user. Nope, you have a real user mailbox. So then what's a room mailbox or an equipment mailbox? Well, these are also called resource mailboxes. These are special mailboxes that are designed mostly for the purpose of scheduling resources. So if you imagine with a room, you might think, well, what kind of rooms do I have in my organization? Maybe there's a training room. Maybe there are conference rooms. Whatever kind of rooms you have that have to be scheduled. Let's say 2 different individuals want to use the same room at the same time. Who takes care of that typically? You might have someone with a piece of paper that keeps track of who has use of those rooms, and maybe they do all of that manually, which is fine. If you have a smaller organization, that may work just fine. But in a larger organization, having a room mailbox will make it easier to schedule time with that room. The same is true with an equipment mailbox. When you think about equipment, you might think of laptops, you might think of projectors. So certainly sometimes when you're scheduling a room, you may also need to schedule equipment at the same time. Well, having the ability to check the schedule of certain equipment, let's say it's that favorite projector of yours that you want to use, and it's not available on a certain day, but let's say the room is available. Well, what's the point? Instead, you can check the schedule of both the room and the equipment. Make sure that you can schedule both for the special meeting that you're going to have, and then request to use that equipment and that room at that time. So that's one of the nice things about setting up room and equipment mailboxes, but certainly not for sending and receiving email or using it as a regular email account. Rather, these resource mailboxes are used for scheduling. Now, what about linked mailboxes? Notice it says a linked mailbox is the name for a mailbox that is accessed by a security principal or user in a separate trusted forest. So in the event you need to set up a mailbox for a user that's located not within your Active Directory forest, but a separate forest, however one that's trusted, well, you can do that. It's called a linked mailbox. That mailbox will still reside on the Exchange server. So now that you understand a little bit more about the different mailbox types, we're going to stick with user mailbox and we're going to click Next. Now it says, do you want to create mailboxes for a new user or existing users? Now in the case of Globomantics, certainly we have existing users in our Active Directory domain. However, they don't have mailboxes located on this server. So in that case, we would choose existing users, and then we would be able to give individual users their mailboxes. But for the sake of demonstrating the full scope of the new mailbox wizard, we're going to leave it as new user and click Next. Okay, and so perhaps you know the organizational unit that you're going to put this account in. In this case, we're going to let it go to the default users container. We'll give the person a name. And we even have to supply the password. And we can choose for the user to change the password at the next logon. We provide an alias. And then if we don't select anything here, the user account will go to the default database. However, if we have multiple databases already created, we could select this checkbox and then find that database and put the user account in whatever database we'd like. At this time, we only have a single database because that's going to work just fine for us. And keep in mind, you can always move the account to another database if you'd like at a future time. Here we can include the Managed Folder Mailbox policy, the Exchange ActiveSync Mailbox policy. At this time, we're going to leave this out of the mix because this is a little bit more advanced. We're just going to create a user account in a Mailbox database that can send and receive email. We'll worry about these items later. It asks us about archive settings. We're going to click Next. And here we see a review of all of the different information that we put in. We click New. You can see that it was created. You can also see the PowerShell command that was used along with all of the information is included right here. If we click Control-C, we can copy that information, and then we can use that information to create mailboxes a whole lot faster without having to go through the GUI. We click Finish. And now we see we have our user account right there. Now the interesting thing about this mailbox is that even though it's created and the user account is created, the actual mailbox data is not created until the mailbox either receives a message or the user logs on to it. So for fun, let's log on to this account through Outlook web app. Okay, so here we are on a Windows 7 desktop machine. This system is connected up to our domain, and what we're going to do is use Outlook web app in order to see the mailbox of the user we just created. So if we open up our Internet Explorer, okay, and we're going to go to a secure page, so we're going to use secure socket layers for the connection. So we'll type HTTPS, and then we're going to use the IP address of the Exchange server because we don't have the internal DNS set up for the Exchange server just yet. That server is not live for others to access just yet, so we'll just type in the IP address, and we'll type /OWA for Outlook web app. We hit enter, and you'll notice we get this security message that's saying that there's a problem with the security certificate. This is normal. It's okay. It's telling you that there is a certificate, but the security certificate presented by the website was not issued by a trusted certificate authority. That's okay because we're just testing this. You can use this certificate for a while and teach people to bypass this, but obviously in a real production environment, you're going to want to get a trusted certificate in order to ensure that this screen doesn't come up. If we click Continue to this website, you can see that aside from a certificate error and reddening of your address bar up here, that everything works just fine. So here we see Outlook web app. We can choose if it's a public or private computer. In this case, it is a private computer. And we're going to type in the username and password. And click Sign In. Now the first time you sign into Outlook web app, it's going to ask you a few questions. You can change the time zone if you'd like. You can change the language. Everything looks fine. We'll say OK. And we're connected in. Here you can see that the Outlook web app is actually pretty impressive. You can see that it very smoothly mimics Outlook itself. So why don't we send a new email off to one of our coworkers? Okay, and so in this case, if we click to, okay, so from here we have our global address list, and we want to send an email to Susan Baker. We click her name, we click to, we say OK. We're just going to send a simple test message. And click Send. And you can see that our account that we created is working just fine. That means that our Exchange server is also working just fine. So let's go back over to the server and let's show what happens when we disconnect a mailbox from the user. Okay, so we're back on the Exchange server, and here we have the account that we were just working with. Here we have Susan's account. Now we know that Susan has mail in that account because we just sent her an email. And being that Susan is not a real account, we know that she hasn't picked up that email just yet. But if we select her account and we click Disable, notice it says disabling the mailbox will remove the Exchange properties from the Windows user object and mark the mailbox in the database for removal. Are you sure you want to disable Susan Baker? We click Yes, and then we click Disconnected Mailbox. You can see that Susan Baker's mailbox has been moved here. Now, if we go back to Active Directory users and computers, there's Susan Baker's account. And that's because we didn't delete the account. We could have deleted the account if instead of selecting Disable, we selected Remove. All we did by selecting Disable is we severed the connection between Susan's mailbox and Susan's user account. So one of the things you can do with that is, let's say we go back to Active Directory users and computers, and let's create a new user account. Okay, so we have the user account. That user does not have a mailbox just yet. Let's go back to the disconnected mailbox that used to be Susan Baker's, and let's connect that mailbox. So it's a user mailbox. We click Next. In this case, it's an existing user. We created the user, and it's Diane Manley, not Susan Baker, even though she still exists. Okay, and so now, when we go back to mailboxes, we see Diane has a mailbox. Now, you and I both know that that mailbox originally was Susan Baker's, but it was disabled. It was put in the disconnected mailbox folder here, and then we reconnected it over to Diane. So it's good for you to note the difference between what happens when you delete the user account and the mailbox goes with it, and when you disconnect that mailbox from its user, and then you can reconnect it back to the original user if you like, or you can reconnect it to a totally different user if you'd like. So what do we want to do next? Well, there are any number of different things that we can do at this point. In reality, managing a mailbox server can be quite extensive. There are all sorts of different settings, if you recall, under Organization Configuration, under Mailbox. Here we could start talking about managed folder mailbox policies. We can talk about managing custom folders, address lists. Really, we could spend hours talking about all of the different settings. But maybe one of the things we'd like to do is create a new mailbox database. Here we have one, and that's working just fine for us. But let's say we wanted to create another mailbox database. Well, we could use the link here for the wizard, New Mailbox Database. And you can see that it's pretty simple. Mailbox database name. And it asks about a server name. We know we only have the one server, but we'll click the little browse button anyway. And of course, we select our New York Exchange server. Keep in mind that if we had other servers, you could put that database anywhere. We click Next, and it asks us to set the paths for the database and log folders. Now initially, the database is going to be named mbdatabase2.edb. Remember, that's the database itself. And then this is the folder location, mbdatabase2, the folder location for transaction logs. By default, they're both going on the C drive. So there are a couple of things wrong in terms of real Exchange management here. For one thing, you don't want to put your database file and your log files on the C drive, on the system drive, or even on the same drive where your Exchange installation is. Instead, you really want to put these on separate drives altogether. But for the purposes of demonstration, we're going to leave it where it is. We're going to click Next. It gives us a configuration summary. We click New. And you see that the wizard will not only create the database, but it will mount the database. So you may be wondering, why would I create an additional mailbox database. I have one. Why would I need a second one or a third one or a fourth one? Well, the real purpose behind creating additional databases is purely for the management and performance side to Exchange. So you can see here the first part completed. Now it's mounting the database. Keep in mind that these databases can grow quite large. And so in considering backing up and restoring these databases, or in thinking about high availability concerns, these are things that may prompt you towards creating additional databases. But in a small environment, you may decide you're going to work with only one database or perhaps only a few databases. So we click Finish. And now you can see we have two different databases we can use when it comes to adding new mailboxes. So for the time being, all of our mailboxes are still located in the first database. But if we wanted to change this, if we wanted to take, let's say, Diane, and here we can see in the Actions pane the new local move request. If we click that, you see it says a new move request will be placed for the following mailboxes. So we're going to move this mailbox to a different database. We click Browse. Here we see the database we just created. We say OK. And Next. Now here it says specify how you want to manage corrupted messages in a mailbox, which happens from time to time. So we could say skip the mailbox or skip the corrupted messages. We'll choose the second one because we do want the mailbox moved. And it says maximum number of messages to skip. In this case, we'll say 0. We'll click Next. And then New. Okay, and there we go. The mailbox has been moved over to that second database. Now from the user perspective, they'll never know. And that's actually a good thing. It's not really something that the user needs to know where their mailbox is located in terms of databases. All they need to worry about is opening up their mail and being able to send and receive messages. But you can see how easy it is to move mailboxes over using the wizard.